In the granite quarries of Aswan, carved into bedrock harder than steel, there are marks that should not exist. They sit in the stone like fingerprints left by something that was never supposed to be here. Smooth curved scoops, each one hollowed into the rock with a precision so consistent, so uniform, that the first instinct of anyone standing over them is to assume they were made by a machine. Not a tool swung by a tired arm under the desert sun, but a machine, guided, controlled, repeating the same motion over and over without variation. These marks appear across the largest and most ambitious stoneworking projects of the ancient world. They wrap around the famous unfinished obelisk, a single, monstrous piece of granite that, had it ever been freed from the bedrock, would have weighed more than 1,000 tons. And the closer you look at those scoops, the harder it becomes to accept the story we have been told about who made them, and how. Because for more than a century, the explanation was simple, and it was reassuring. It told us that human hands, human muscle, and human patience were enough. But in 2024, that explanation was handed to something that had never been told what it was supposed to believe. A machine intelligence with no career to protect, no theory to defend, no professor to disappoint. It was given the images, and it was asked one question: what made these marks? And what it concluded did not gently revise the old story. It rejected it completely. Sit with that for a moment, because everything that follows grows out of that single, unsettling refusal. Let us go back to the beginning, to the place itself. The Aswan granite quarries lie along the eastern bank of the Nile in southern Egypt, roughly 500 miles south of Cairo, where the river narrows and the green strip of farmland gives way to bare, sun-scorched rock. This is where the ancient world came for its hardest stone. Granite from these quarries traveled north to become the cores of pyramids, the columns of temples, the towering obelisks that pointed at the sun, and the colossal statues whose faces still stare out across the sand. This was not soft limestone you could scrape with a copper blade. This was granite that registers between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, which means it is harder than almost every metal tool that existed anywhere in the ancient world. Bronze would dull against it. Copper would crumple. To shape this stone, you needed something that could outlast the stone itself, and that is the heart of the problem we are about to walk into. For generations, the textbook account was clean and confident. The workers of dynastic Egypt, the story goes, shaped granite by pounding it. They held round balls of dolerite, and even harder stone, and they hammered the granite surface again and again, crushing it grain by grain, lowering the rock millimeter by exhausting millimeter. Over weeks, over months, over years, a trench would deepen, a block would loosen, and eventually the stone could be levered free and floated downriver. And to be fair to that explanation, it was not pulled out of thin air. Researchers actually tried it. They took dolerite balls, they pounded real granite, and they proved that yes, with enough time and enough sweat, you can break this stone down. The method works. On paper, the mystery was solved. The matter was closed. But there is a problem with this explanation. A problem that becomes more disturbing the closer you bring your eyes to the actual marks left in the actual quarry. Because when those modern researchers pounded granite with dolerite, they did not produce smooth flowing scoops. They produced ugly, rough, irregular pits, fractured edges, crushed, shattered surfaces with inconsistent depths, the kind of damage you would expect from blunt impact against brittle crystal. That is what pounding looks like. It looks violent, it looks random, it looks human, and that is not what is carved into the walls at Aswan. The marks in the quarry are something else entirely. They are smooth, they are uniform, they are consistently sized and spaced with a regularity that does not belong to manual labor at all. Run your fingers across them, the way visitors and researchers have for decades, and you do not feel the jagged ruin of crushed stone. You feel a curve, a clean swept arc, as if a tool with a fixed shape passed through the granite and lifted out a precise spoonful of it, then moved over and did it again, identically and again and again, hundreds of times, thousands of times. They look less like the scars of a hammer and far more like the path of a guided cutting tool. And that single observation, the gap between what pounding produces and what the quarry actually shows, is the crack through which everything else pours. Nowhere is this clearer than on the unfinished obelisk itself. This is the object that draws people from around the world, and for good reason. It is enormous, lying on its back in the bedrock, abandoned partway through its creation when cracks crept through the granite and ruined it forever. The ancient workers simply walked away and left it where it lay, and in doing so, they froze a moment in time. The obelisk is still attached to the living rock beneath it, surrounded by the trenches that were being cut to free it. And it is in those trenches, along those walls, that the scoop marks live. They measure roughly 6 to 8 inches across. They sink 2 to 4 inches deep, and they curve over and over in the same consistent arc, smooth to the touch, never fractured, as though each one was scooped rather than smashed. Now think about what the old theory asks of these trenches. Researchers who have studied the unfinished obelisk have estimated that cutting the channels around it by pounding with dolerite would have demanded decades of continuous brutal labor. Decades. And not just labor, but labor performed in a way that somehow never left the rough, fractured pits that pounding always produces, and instead left these smooth, repeating curves with machine-like regularity. The math does not sit comfortably. The marks do not match the method. And for 100 years, that discomfort was politely set aside, because there was no better explanation on the table, and because the alternative was almost too strange to say out loud. That is where the story might have stayed, unresolved and quietly ignored, if it had remained only in human hands. Human researchers come to ancient stone carrying everything they have ever been taught. They carry the timeline they were trained in. They carry the consensus of their field. They carry the very real awareness that questioning the official narrative too loudly can end a career. None of that helps you see a stone clearly. So, in 2024, a different kind of observer was brought to Aswan. Not a person, but a system. And it would look at these marks the way no human archaeologist ever truly could, with absolutely nothing to lose. The system was Grok, the artificial intelligence built by Elon Musk's company XAI, and what makes the next part of this story so unsettling is precisely how plainly it began. There was no grand expedition, there was no new dig, a set of high-resolution images of the Aswan quarry marks, photographs detailed enough to show the texture of individual scoops down to the grain of the granite, was simply fed into the system, and the instructions given were deliberately, almost surgically, empty of bias. The researchers did not tell it what it was looking at. They did not mention dolerite. They did not mention pharaohs, or the 3rd millennium before Christ, or copper tools, or any of the framework that a human mind carries into a quarry like luggage. They asked it, in effect, a single naked question. What made these marks? Compare them to everything you know. Tell us what fits. That is the quiet power of the approach. A human expert cannot unknow what they know. Ask a trained Egyptologist to look at the unfinished obelisk, and they will, with the best intentions in the world, see it through 3,000 years of accumulated certainty. The system had no such certainty to defend. It had no career that could be ended, no colleagues who might frown, no textbook it had spent 30 years helping to write. It had only the patterns in the pixels and an enormous internal library of how things get cut, both in the ancient world and in the modern one, from flint blades to laser arrays. And so it began to measure. What it found did not gently nudge the old theory. It did not propose a refinement. It rejected the explanation outright. The patterns Grok identified, according to those who reviewed its analysis, did not match the signature of impact at all. They did not look like the chaotic, branching micro-fractures that spread through stone when it is struck repeatedly with a heavy ball of harder rock. Instead, they matched the characteristics of rotational cutting, the smooth, continuous removal of material by a tool that is turning rather than striking. Pounding shatters. What the system saw in these scoops was something closer to carving, or grinding, or milling, performed with a steadiness that human muscle does not produce. And it went deeper than shape. When the imagery was examined at the microscopic level, the analysis flagged traces of materials that, by every rule of the accepted story, should not have been there at all. Substances associated not with stone-on-stone labor, but with engineered cutting media. We will come to exactly what those substances were, because they are among the strangest pieces of this entire puzzle, and they deserve to be sat with on their own. But the headline finding was already enough to make the people reviewing it go very quiet. The geometric precision of the marks, the system concluded, did not suggest human control. It suggested machine control. Let that settle for a moment, because it is easy to read past it. We are not talking about a slightly better tool than dolerite. We are not talking about a clever copper saw fed with sand, which is the kind of refinement archaeology has long been willing to entertain. We are talking about a verdict, delivered by a system with no stake in the outcome, that the thing which made these marks behaved like a machine. Controlled position, controlled speed, controlled pressure. A tool that did not get tired, did not waver, did not vary its angle as a human arm inevitably does over the course of a long, exhausting day. The precision the system found exceeded what unguided human labor produces even when those humans are highly skilled. And so it did something that should give anyone pause. It flagged the patterns as non-human. To understand why that word carries such weight, you have to understand the stone itself and where it sits in the world. The Aswan granite quarries lie along the Nile in the far south of Egypt, roughly 500 miles upriver from Cairo, in a landscape of pink and gray rock baked under a relentless sun. For thousands of years, this was the source. The granite that armored the inner chambers of the pyramids came from here. The granite of temple gateways, of colossal seated statues, of obelisks raised toward the sun. Much of it was quarried from this very ground and floated downriver on barges to wherever the empire wanted it. This was not a minor backwater. It was, in a sense, the stone heart of ancient Egypt. And the stone is brutally hard. Aswan granite registers between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, the standard measure of a mineral's resistance to scratching. To put that in perspective, that is harder than most of the metal tools available anywhere in the ancient world. Copper sits far below it. Even bronze, the great technological leap of the age, does not come close. You cannot simply carve granite of this hardness with the metals these people are supposed to have had. The metal gives way long before the stone does. This is the central, stubborn fact that the pounding theory was invented to solve in the first place. If you cannot cut it, the reasoning went, then you must batter it into submission with something even harder, a stone hammer of dolerite, slowly, over a span of time that beggars belief. But the system had just looked at the evidence of that battering and found that it was not battering at all. So now there are two facts in the room at once, and they are at war. The stone is too hard for the tools they had, and the marks are too smooth, too regular, too controlled for the method they are supposed to have used. Either one alone is a problem. Together they form a contradiction that the old story simply cannot absorb. And when you go back to the unfinished obelisk and run your fingertips along those curving trenches, knowing both of those things at the same time, the smoothness stops feeling reassuring and starts feeling impossible. It would be tempting to wave this away as a single odd result, a quirk of how an algorithm reads an image. So, the analysis did not stop at one observation. It moved from the qualitative to the quantitative, from "this looks wrong" to "here is exactly how wrong it is. And here is the number." Because if these marks really were the product of a machine, then they would carry a fingerprint that hand labor cannot fake, no matter how skilled the worker. They would be consistent, not roughly consistent, not consistent enough to impress a tour group, consistent in a way that can be measured across thousands of marks and expressed as a percentage. And when the system began to measure mark after mark after mark, the consistency it uncovered was the kind of thing that does not happen by hand, not over thousands of repetitions, not across a wall the size of a building, Not when the worker is human, fatigued, working in shifting light, swinging with a body that tires and trembles and never repeats the same arc twice. The system measured the scoops at Aswan one by one. It cataloged their width, their depth, the radius of their curve, the spacing between one scoop and the next. Where a casual eye sees a wall of more or less similar grooves, the analysis built a table of numbers running into the thousands. And then it asked the simplest possible question of that table. How much do these marks vary from one another? In handwork, the answer is always a lot. A man swinging a stone produces a wide scatter, deeper here, shallower there, a little wider when his grip is fresh and a little narrower when his arm is dead. No two strikes truly alike. That scatter is the signature of a human being. It is the proof that a person was there. The scatter at Aswan was not there. Across large areas of the quarry face, the size of the scoop marks varied by less than 5%. Read that again and let it settle, because 5% does not sound like much until you try to produce it yourself. 5% variation, sustained over thousands of repetitions, across a granite wall, is not the work of a tired man with a rock. It is the tolerance of a manufacturing process. And the spacing told the same story even more sharply. The distance between one scoop and the next held to within 3%. The marks were not just similar in size. They were laid down at intervals so even that the placement itself looked planned, indexed, advanced by some fixed increment rather than judged by eye and muscle. Then came the detail that turned a curiosity into something genuinely unnerving. Every scoop followed the same arc, not similar arcs, the same arc, as though each one had been carved as a tool with a single, unchanging cutting radius. When a human being gouges at stone, the curve of the gouge depends on the angle of the strike, the length of the swing, the position of the body, and all of those things change constantly. You cannot help it. Your reach is different when you lean left than when you lean right. The arc of your tool is a moving target, but at Aswan, the arc did not move. It was fixed, as if it had been set by the geometry of a wheel rather than the geometry of a man. The system flagged this directly. The cutting radius, it concluded, was constant in a way that human anatomy cannot produce, because the human arm is not a machine with a fixed pivot. It is a jointed, variable, living thing, and these marks did not remember a single living thing about it. So, the analysis put a label on the pattern, and the label was blunt. Non-human. Not in the sense of aliens, not in the sense of anything from the sky, but in the precise technical sense that the precision exceeded what unguided human labor can generate, even with the most skilled workers imaginable, even with 1,000 years of practice. The position of the tool, its speed, the pressure it brought to bear on the stone, all of it appeared to have been governed mechanically rather than swung by an arm and a shoulder and a hope. The marks behaved as though something held the tool and moved it, steadily, indifferent to fatigue, indifferent to the worker's reach, indifferent to everything that makes human labor human. And once you accept even the possibility of that, you start to notice where the marks actually are. Because here is where the quarry stops being a place of tired men with stones and starts being something stranger. Some of the scoop marks at Aswan continue underneath granite blocks that were never removed. They run into the gap between the block and the bedrock, into spaces so confined that no human worker could fit inside them, let alone swing anything. There is the mark, smooth and curving and confident, disappearing into a slot too tight for a hand. Who put it there? With what? A man cannot reach into a space he cannot enter. It gets worse. The marks appear in tight inner corners, the kind of angle where two cut faces meet, where there is simply no room to draw back a pounding stone, and bring it forward with force. To pound, you need clearance. You need a backswing. You need somewhere to put your elbow. In those corners, there is nowhere, and yet the smooth scoops are there too, curving cleanly right into the join as though the confinement meant nothing at all. And some of the marks climb walls that stand nearly vertical, at heights where a worker would have to be suspended in the air, hanging awkwardly from something, contorting his body just to make contact. Never mind delivering the thousands of controlled, identical blows the surface actually shows. The system noticed what all of these impossible locations had in common. The cutting motion, it concluded, moved in continuous arcs that were independent of where a human body could stand. That is the single sentence that breaks the old story for good. A hand tool is chained to the body that holds it. Wherever the man cannot go, the tool cannot go. But these marks went places the man could not. They flowed through confined slots and into sealed corners and up sheer faces in one continuous, unbroken motion, the way a guided tool moves along a path that has been programmed for it, the way a cutting head travels on a track that does not care about elbows or backswings or the limits of human reach. The motion passed through positions that human leverage simply cannot account for. It was not that the work was hard. It was that, in places, the work was impossible for a person to have done at all. And then there are the pits. Scattered through the Aswan quarries are deep, narrow shafts, test pits cut straight down into the granite to depths of 30, 40, even 50 feet, and yet only 3 or 4 feet wide. Picture that for a moment. A shaft as deep as a 4 or 5-story building is tall, and so narrow you could barely turn around at the bottom of it. The traditional reading is sensible enough on its face. They are exploratory shafts, the textbooks say, sunk to test the quality of the granite at depth before committing to a major extraction. The Egyptians wanted to know if the stone below was sound, so they dug down to find out. But sit with the practicalities of cutting one of those shafts by hand, and the explanation begins to dissolve. There is no room to swing anything down there. The visibility is almost nothing. The deeper you go, the darker it gets, and the lighting available to ancient workers was a flame, smoke, and a flicker in a stone throat. How do you batter granite into a perfectly narrow vertical shaft, by feel, in the dark, with no space to draw back your arm, for 50 feet straight down? And when the system mapped those pits, it found something about them that no one was supposed to be able to know in advance. Some of the pits do not fall in a clean vertical line at all. They bend. They curve as they descend, drifting to one side and then correcting, following something the cutters could not have seen from the surface. And when the system overlaid the path of each curving shaft against the internal geology of the granite, mapped from later surveys, the bends matched. The pits were tracking the natural grain of the stone, the mineral veins running through it, the planes of weakness hidden deep inside the block. The cutters were not fighting the granite. They were reading it, responding to its internal structure as if they could see straight through solid rock to the flaws and fault lines waiting 40 feet below. There is no version of hand labor that explains that. A man pounding granite in the dark works blind. He cannot know there is a vein of softer mineral 3 feet to his left and 20 feet down, and he certainly cannot steer a 50-foot shaft to follow it. Yet the walls of these pits show consistent quality from the top all the way to the bottom. The cutting did not get sloppier as it got deeper, did not degrade as the workers tired or the light failed. The method held. Whatever made those shafts performed exactly the same at 50 feet of depth as it did at the surface, which is the signature of a machine, not a man. Then the microscope was turned on the cut surfaces themselves, and the last comfortable explanation came apart. Under electron magnification, the granite did not show the crushed, fractured texture that pounding leaves behind. It showed faint spiral patterns, barely visible arcs sweeping across the surface, the kind of trace a tool leaves when it is spinning while it cuts, like a drill bit, like a milling head turning at speed. And here and there, individual mineral grains appeared partially fused, their edges softened and run together, as if they had been briefly melted. Cold percussion cannot do that. You cannot pound granite into melting. That kind of localized heating comes only from friction at high speed, from a tool moving fast enough to turn resistance into heat. The chemistry told the same story. Trace residues left in the cuts matched two materials in particular, diamond dust and corundum, crystalline aluminum oxide, both among the hardest substances known, both used today in industrial grinding and precision cutting. The closest matches in the entire database of methods, ancient and modern, were not copper chisels or dolerite balls. They were water jet cutting, ultrasonic cutting, and diamond-tipped rotary tools. Every one of them modern. Every one of them impossible 4,500 years ago. And yet here is the detail that should keep you awake. On some of these granite surfaces there are paintings, prehistoric red ochre images of birds and boats and simple geometric symbols, the work of people long before the dynasties, typically dated to 6,000, even 4,000 years before the Common Era. In several places, those paintings sit directly on top of the precision scoop marks. The paint lies over the cut, which means the cutting came first. The marks were already there, already ancient, when someone pressed a hand of red ochre against the stone and drew a bird. The most sophisticated granite cutting on Earth may predate the painting, predate the pyramids, predate the pharaohs, predate the very idea of Egypt. The system found one more thing, and it is the strangest of all. Across the quarries, it could roughly date the work by sequence, and it found the precision running backwards. The oldest cuts were the finest. The later cuts, the ones we can confidently hand to dynastic Egyptians with their bronze and copper tools, were rougher, cruder, less uniform. Technology is supposed to improve over time. At Aswan, it declined. The best work is the earliest work, and everything after it is a fading echo, a civilization remembering how something was once done and slowly forgetting the how. That inversion leaves only uncomfortable doors. Perhaps there was a lost technology, rare and reserved for the greatest projects, that simply did not survive. Perhaps there was a forgotten people in the Green Nile Valley of the wet Sahara, building before our timeline begins. Or perhaps the old kingdom we revere was never the dawn at all, but the long dusk of something far older and far greater, declining toward us rather than rising toward the sky. The system did not dig a new quarry. It did not find a hidden chamber. It looked at evidence that has sat in plain sight for over a century, the scoop marks anyone can run a hand across, and it asked the questions human researchers had quietly agreed not to ask. The precision is measurable. The spirals are real. The melted grains, the diamond traces, the painting over the cut, the backwards timeline, all of it is sitting there in the stone, waiting. The granite has been trying to tell us something the whole time, and we built a comfortable story so we would not have to hear it. So when you stand at the unfinished obelisk and run your fingers along a scoop that is too smooth, too round, too perfect, and you remember that someone painted a bird over it before history began, ask yourself the only question that matters. Is this the proof that we are not the first to master stone? That a civilization rose and fell in the Nile Valley long before the names we know, leaving its fingerprints in the hardest rock on Earth? Or is there a simpler answer hiding in the marks that no one has thought of yet? Tell me honestly, down in the comments, what you believe carved those scoops and what year you think it happened. I read every single reply. And if you want to know which ancient site the analysis is being pointed at next, the one that may be even harder to explain, leave a like and subscribe, because the stones are still speaking, and we are only beginning to listen.